So my wife said she felt too much emptiness, so she left today. Of course, I'll explain that in a little bit, as I always do. Thought I'd bring you in the tiny house and just show you a little bit of it. It's been a while. Talk about a little bit of electric and how I have to keep up with demands on electric. Of course, this is the wood stove. It hasn't been used all, the last 2 or 3 months. I haven't even taken out the last load of wood in it. Coffee pot, that's what's so aggravating about summertime is in summer we can't warm the extra coffee on the wood stove. We make a pot of coffee and it's enough coffee in that pot to fill the thermos one time, and then there's another thermos full in the pot. Well, in the wintertime we just set it on there and we drink that first so it doesn't boil off, and then start on the thermos. But in the summertime we start with the thermos, then we have to take the pot back out there to warm up on the stove. This is the pallet wood that Carolyn put up. It sure did make this place look really nice. I've said in previous videos that I don't really notice it anymore unless it's in a video. When I see it in the video, it's like, man, that is just beautiful. But before we got all the stuff hung on the walls and everything, and there was nothing in the house, it was just a pallet wood. Ah, it was absolutely fantastic. And then you see the metal sheeting that we bought, and we put that on the ceiling as well. For those who were with us when we were building the tiny house, that's the ceiling and the shield behind the stove. And we also use that metal behind the water heater and above it. That way there was no risk of the water heater catching anything on fire. It was a cheap method. Of course, you got to put an inch gap in between the wall. So they sell these things, I don't even remember what they're called, but a wood stove company sells it. It's little spacers, 1-inch spacer. And that way you can put your hand in there and it stays cool. And it's actually phenomenal. You put your hand on top of the metal. It's pretty warm when the wood stove's going. But you put your hand back there and that wood is not hot at all. It's kind of neat how that works. Then we got all her cooking utensils hung up, all the spices. My desk is over here. The Berkey, of course, it's just lived in. Every time I show the inside of the house, people complain, oh, it's just so messy in there. I don't think it's messy. It's lived in, but it's not messy. It's quite organized. Everything has a spot. And then over here we have the canned foods and just junk. And then we have the freezer. Now, we also have a refrigerator. As you may remember, we bought the freezer when we thought the refrigerator went out on us. We went to the grocery store, bought some food, and I noticed it wasn't starting. I didn't know what was wrong with it. So, bought the freezer, and we just use this as a storage unit now. We can put, or like a medicine cabinet. So we ran this for a while. Well, I thought, you know, I'm going to check on that refrigerator. And so I checked on it, and it worked. Who knows what was wrong with it, but it just shut off that one day. I guess it's about ready to go out is my thinking. My other thought is if we ever needed to refrigerate anything just temporarily, we could turn the refrigerator on. But so far we've managed without it. Now today, went grocery shopping, filled the freezer completely full like always. We package everything up in meal sizes, everything. When you living off-grid, the freezer is a challenge. It is very difficult to keep this thing running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Or at least it's always on your mind. Right now, a cloud has shaded us. It's been partly sunny all day, but those clouds come over and you think, am I going to have enough energy? You know, the freezer is running non-stop right now because we just filled it with a bunch of thawed out meat. So you got to think ahead when you're doing this. We deliberately went shopping today, Sunday, because I looked at the app and it said it was going to be sunny today, at least partly sunny, and then tomorrow and the next day. That's important. We need 3 days for the food to freeze. At nighttime, I run the generator, and somebody said you should have enough electric to run on battery throughout the night with 8 batteries. And the answer is yeah, I'm sure I do. I don't want to risk it. If I damaged 8 batteries, that's $800 that I got to replace pretty soon. So I would rather spend the $3 over the next 3 nights, because that's what it's going to take, 1 gallon a day, 1 gallon a night, to run the generator overnight, so I make sure that freezer keeps running. And no risk of harming the batteries. The way I calculate it is, okay, it's going to be $3. I guess it's actually $9, $3 a gallon. So it's going to be about $9. So I just add that $9 into our food bill. So today we spent $206 on groceries. You add the $9, that's $215. When you look at it that way, it's not too terribly bad. It's a lot cheaper than replacing $800 worth of batteries, because I went below 12.3 volts. With lead acid batteries, you're not allowed to let them go below 12.3 volts. That's 50% of the battery's capacity. Amp hours wise, I got plenty. But there has been times I woke up in the morning, especially in the winter. Winter is very difficult to get through. So in the winter time, when we buy groceries, we actually try to wait until the temperatures get into the single digits or low teens and go grocery shopping. That way we can actually just put it in the cooler, set it outside, and let it freeze outside. Then we don't have to run the generator at all. So you got to think ahead. Now the other thing we do is, when we get home, we take everything out of the freezer, put it in the cooler so it doesn't thaw out, and then as she's packaging it up, all the stuff that is thawed out goes on the bottom, because heat rises, cool air falls. That's why they make a chest freezer where the door opens up, not out, because your cold air is going to go to the bottom. It's not going to come shooting out of the freezer when you open the door. So you put all the thawed out meat at the bottom. That way it draws the cold out of the things that are already frozen. So it will shorten the amount of time it has to run. If you put it up here on the top, it will cycle on and off all night long. It'll run for a while during the day, but at nighttime it'll start cycling. And cycling is bad, because when it starts up, you use 2 to 3 times more electricity just for that few seconds to get that startup going, because it's got to start that motor. It takes peak amperage is what it says, peak wattage. So when you buy a generator, for example, you buy a 2500 watt generator, but only 1800 watt usable. The 25 is for that peak startup. It lasts for a second. So if you're cycling every 5 or 10 minutes on your freezer, you're using a ton of more of electricity with that peak startup. So you want to keep that thing running, because it's going to run for 3 days non-stop. And then we have a small cooler out here. Still got to clean up all the boxes from shopping. Out here, just for the daily use items. Mayonnaise, or, well, for example, we feed Skitty canned chicken. We can our chicken with the pressure canner. And if you want to see us pressure canning, go to my channel, go to playlist. You can see the pressure canning videos. We can all kinds of stuff, pork, bacon, beef. So we put that chicken in there, and then all we have to do when the freezer is less full is freeze up some bottled water, and then we can use that bottled water to keep this cool throughout the day. And I put cycle out a bottle. I put 2 bottles in a day. So 1 in the morning and then 1 in the evening. And that keeps everything pretty cool. That way we don't have to run that refrigerator. I tell you, when we went to buy the freezer, we was actually going to go buy a refrigerator. I wasn't thinking. It went out. Carolyn had all that meat sitting out that we just bought. And I thought, man, we got to go to Walmart and get another refrigerator. So we're on the road, and she says, I want a freezer. I'm like, what do you mean you want a freezer? How are we going to keep things refrigerated? She said, well, just get a cooler. And I said, you want to buy ice? She said, no, we'll have a freezer. We can freeze ice. Duh. Trying to explain my idea behind the freezer. I don't live in SHTF. A lot of people want me to prepare for SHTF nonstop. This isn't SHTF. This is off-grid living. And as a result, I do run a generator. On these rare occasions, once a month we go grocery shopping, that we have to run the generator overnight for 3 nights. It's actually 2.5 nights. And so what I actually try to do on that 3rd night is I put about half a tank of gas in this. That way it will die on me in the middle of the night. But what I do is I start the generator, and then I go in there and I plug the battery charger to the batteries. The house is still hooked up to the inverter. What happens is, for those who still don't understand, you have an inverter. The inverter takes electricity from the batteries. So you charge batteries with solar panels or the battery charger, either one. The batteries go to the inverter. The inverter changes those battery, that DC electric, 12 volt DC electric, into AC electric, house electric. So car electric is what I'm talking about, DC, car electric, into house electric. I used to do it a little differently. When we had the bigger generator, sometimes I would unplug the house from the inverter, plug it directly into the generator. The problem is if the generator dies for some reason overnight, you've lost electric to the entire house. It's smarter to use the battery charger at 10 amps, because that's what the refrigerator takes from the batteries, 10 amps. It's a little bit of a conversion. You got to understand the freezer doesn't actually use 10 amps. Its wattage is basically what we're talking about. The freezer, let's say, uses 120 volts times 1 amp. That's 120 watts. So it's 1 amp in the house. But down here, when you're using a battery, it's 12 volts times 10 amps equals 120 watts. So it's all wattage. So the amperage changes when it's from DC to AC, because AC uses more volts, less amps. DC uses usually less volts, more amps. So that inverter is inverting all that stuff. So if the generator dies, we're still pulling from the batteries. I understand that there's a risk that I could hurt the batteries at that point, but let's say the generator died at midnight. So it's been running on the generator for 4 or 5 hours. It dies. So that means the batteries only have to keep up for the next 5 hours. I get up at 5 o'clock. I'll notice, hey, the generator's not running, and I can make corrections at that point. I have a backup generator in case this one just blows up, or it might run out of gas, or, you know, whatever reason. Even the oil has a low oil shutoff. If that happens, of course, I always check the oil. But that old generator I had, it used a lot of oil, and that did happen to me one time. The oil was low and shut off. So it's the one flaw, if there is a flaw in my system, is trying to freeze meat. So to address the SHTFers, stuff that hits the fans, if something were to happen where we could not buy groceries anymore, we couldn't buy gasoline for the generator, I would just start canning all our food. Everything in the freezer. It'd take about, at the most, 30 days. Get everything canned up, then I can just shut the freezer off. That way, all the solar panels would have to run at that point is the well. So those two items are the most important to me, the well and the freezer. Now, we run the tablet that I make YouTube videos, edit YouTube videos on, off the solar panels as well. But if SHTF were to happen, I wouldn't be making videos anymore. This is the biggest challenge when it comes to living off grid, is that freezer. Making sure you always have power to the freezer. So for example, cloudy day, and with lead acid batteries, I always come down here about 5 o'clock in the afternoon and check the status of the batteries. If they're not charged by 5 o'clock on a cloudy day, I go ahead and start the generator just to make sure that I got enough battery to get through the night. It really is important to me that I don't damage the batteries. I want these batteries to last 5 years each. And I can do that as long as I don't overwork them and I keep them maintained. People talk about, well, battery's only worth, whatever, 800 cycles or 700 cycles. Well, yeah, 700 cycles, but I never let the batteries get that low where it's actually counted as a full cycle. If you only use your battery, say, once a month or when there's a power outage, and you kept it maintained on the solar panels, they would never go bad. As a matter of fact, I use a battery for my RV pump, and it's always on a trickle charge, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We start the RV pump, of course it's running off the battery because it's just a little trickle charge. It's like, I don't know, it's mega amps, milliamps, I guess it's called milliamps, that it's trickling into that battery. But it's always near a full charged capacity, always. So that's what I try to do down here, is keep these batteries at a near always charged full capacity. So getting them through the night without damaging them is critical to keep them healthy. Carolyn thought the freezer was getting too low, so she felt some emptiness and went shopping today. So if you click this up next box, I'm going to take you to the video that I made yesterday. So hope I can inspire you to think ahead so you can live your dreams. Thanks for watching.